it was a cast preview. So we had these cast members, and like these guys were like bored, right? They're like, I'm in line, and they're like on their cell phones playing, Bedazzled or whatever, like, a little jewel drop game. And I'm like, okay, they're not looking at anything in the queue, right? All the awesome props, all this stuff, they could care less. I'm sitting behind them. I don't remember, one of the team members was sitting next to me in the back row, and these three guys are in there, and they're like watching it. And then as things started happening, like when the cannon fires off, they're jumping. And then when we were in that Chinese salon and that wall ripped away, they're like, whoa, my God, they screamed. And I'm like, yes, I did it.
That is Disney Imagineer Ethan Reed, who's here to talk about Mystic Manor, Little Mermaid, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, Monsters, Inc., so much more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 140 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. It's Dan Heaton. Great to be back with another really fun interview. I'm talking today with Ethan Reed, and I had a hard time recording even my first intro after hearing the opener that I put in there because it kept making me laugh. And that vibe is present throughout this interview. Ethan has a lot of really fun stories from working at Disney Imagineering for 22 years. And what's interesting about Ethan to me, too, is that he started out as an animator studying character animation at CalArts. That was what he was kind of heading for, and ended up animating figures like audio animatronics, like the Roz living character at Monsters Inc. at DCA, or, figures for Sindbad, Superstar Limo, a lot of things like that. So he kind of bridges the gap between someone who's more a character animator just in the theme park world. And that's why it makes a lot of sense that he worked on Duffy's friends like Gelatoni and Cookie Ann, and we talk about that, or even his work on Lord Henry Mystic and Albert on Mystic Manor. Just a lot of cool stuff. And what I like, too, about Ethan, similar to Jim Clark and Daniel Joseph, who I talked with this year, is that Ethan has worked on a lot of our more recent attractions. I've loved talking with people that have worked on early Epcot attractions or even at Disneyland. But it is fun to talk to someone that worked on things that are recent, like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train and Mystic Manor, and just some of the cool things that Disney has added in the past 10, 15 years. And Ethan's been closely involved in basically all of them. I'd like to give a quick thanks to Jim Clark for recommending that I talk with Ethan, because he's not a name you hear all the time when you talk about people that have worked at WDI, but he's made a huge impact and has been closely involved in so many amazing attractions. So I'm really happy I got the chance to talk with him. So this is a long one, so let's get right to it. Here is Ethan Reed. My guest today worked as a show animator, concept artist, a lot more at Walt Disney Imagineering for more than 22 years. His career has included work on attractions like Mystic Manor, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, Monsters, Inc. attractions, Duffy and Friends, and so much more. It is Ethan Reed. Ethan, thank you so much for talking with me here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Oh, it's great. You've been involved with so much, and in the past 20 years or so, most of the big attractions that I'm so interested in. So it's really cool to have you on the show. I'd love to know just up front, about kind of your background with Disney, or even what inspired you to want to become an artist in the first place.
I think what inspired me to want to be an artist was I was watching the Academy Awards in 1984, and Clarence Nash, the original voice of Donald Duck, had gotten an Academy Award. And back then, I still thought that cartoon characters were real, right? And I see this kind gentleman get this Academy Award, and he started talking like Donald Duck, and I was just amazed by it. And I just started like quacking. I just started going, just having fun, mimicking what I saw this cool guy doing, and then I was the class clown, so I just kept doing that in the classroom through elementary school, and then I was able to start forming words and start speaking. And then about 5th grade, after being the class clown, my grades were starting to go down. My father said to me, he's like, Ethan, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I'm going to be the voice of Donald Duck. Right. So that's what I wanted to do. And what happened was my dad said, well, the guy who's the voice of Donald Duck, because Clarence Nash had unfortunately passed away, he'd been replaced by Tony Anselmo, who was a young animator. And, my dad knew this, and he's just like, well, you're going to have something to fall back on. The guy who's the voice of Donald Duck, he is an animator. So you're going to have to have something else to do for a career. So I said, well, I'll be an animator. Or I probably said, I'll be an animator. Right. So, that's what I did. And I just devoted myself to drawing. My parents were huge Disney fans. So, they had a hardback copy of The Illusion of Life, which is like the animator's Bible, signed by Frank and Ollie, 2 of Walt's 9 old men. Yeah. And I just remember like going through that book, and I just loved it so much. And I just wanted to learn as much as I could about animation. And there was one artist in particular in the 9 old men who did more than animation. His name was Mark Davis. And Mark Davis, I'm sure many of your listeners know who Mark is, but, he animated Tinkerbell. He animated Maleficent. He animated, Briar Rose. And, but he designed Pirates of the Caribbean and America Sings, Country Bear Jamboree, some of my favorite Disney attractions. That's who my idol was growing up. And I went to CalArts, which was the animation school that was founded by Walt Disney before he passed away. And I did some time in college at San Francisco State University to get my GE and stuff out of the way. And also when I got into when I graduated from high school, Lion King had just come out. Everybody wanted to be an animator, right? And it was difficult to get into the program. There's like 30 slots to get into the character animation program a year. And I think the LA Times had run an article that animators were making 6-figure salaries, which I learned was not really true. There was like probably 2 or 3 that were. And that led to all these people like, oh, I'm going to get into the animation industry because I can make money, which is never a good thing. It was like kind of a gold rush mentality I felt at the time. So I was really happy that I went to San Francisco State first. Half of my friends were interns at this company called Skellington Productions. They had just finished Nightmare Before Christmas, and they were working on James and the Giant Peach. And then my other friends were at this little studio in Point Richmond, California, and they were working on a film called Toy Story. So wow. I got to head over there, hang out with, the people working on Toy Story. And I was just like this kid of this friend who was a render wrangler on the movie. And, I would just hang out and they'd give me toys and things like that. And then I'd go back and work at the Disney store in San Francisco, which is where my part-time job was. And I actually worked in the Disney Gallery. If anyone remembers, the Disney stores in the 90s, you had the regular Disney store, but then you had the Disney Gallery. I think the first one was in Santa Ana. And then the second one was at the Post Reach store in downtown San Francisco on Union Square. So I helped open that store as a cast member, and it was just lovely. I mean, we'd have artists like Ivan Earl come in. We'd have, Mary Costa, like all the different voice talent, all the classic films. So it was a really cool place to be at the time, and I got to see different forms of animation. And then I went to CalArts and, focused on doing traditional animation. And one of the first things I did with my girlfriend who's not my wife, who all the Disney Store cast member, was we got annual passes to Disneyland. Because we're in Southern California. How can we not have an annual pass? So we were some of the very first APs in Southern California, and we would go all the time. I mean, I was working, minimum wage at the Disney Store, right? She had just started. She was working at Film Roman, where they made The Simpsons, and she was doing computer graphics for. They had a video game division at the time, so she was working on that. And we enjoyed going to Disneyland. So Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m., we'd hop in the car, drive down, and we'd just go explore the park. And one of my favorite things to do, and I used to talk to John Hench about this after I started at Disneyland or at Imagineering, is I would love to just take out my sketchbook. Because, when you're an animation student, you have your sketchbook with you and you bring it everywhere with you. I loved sitting on benches, like on Main Street, especially up like above like the train station, because there's a couple benches there. It's also a great place to watch the parade from. And I would sit there and I'd just open up my book and I would just sketch people, quick sketches. And you learned so much by watching these people like around the park. And I was developing my drawing skills, but I was also looking at the guest experience. And that's something I don't know many people have done, right? John Hench did it because he and I talked about it, so I got the opportunity to do an internship right before my last year at CalArts. And it was like the summer before my last year. And I had an internship and it was supposed to be 6 weeks and it lasted until just very recently. So I had the longest internship ever.
Well, that's quite a story. And I agree that I think just having been there at Disneyland, I'm sure played a role in just your interest and also probably in you being there for so long and doing so well. Well, I'd love to hear too about just some early projects, because you arrived at a time when you have, it's the late 90s, you have DCA, you've got Tokyo DisneySea, you've got so much going on at Imagineering. So I'd love to know from you kind of some of your early projects you worked on and what it was like to kind of be there at that time.
Yeah, that's a great question because, I started not at 1401, the main headquarters of Walt Disney Imagineering. I started at the Tahunga facility. And the Tahunga facility was in North Hollywood, and which was not far from my apartment, which was super convenient. And it was a magic factory is the best way to describe it. And I remember that's where I went for my interview. I was interviewed at CalArts first at like this, event. And then I went to the actual facility for the, real interview. And I had to meet with different animators, audiometronics animators, because that's what I was, brought in to do, was to learn how to animate audiometronics, not something you just pick up on the street or even a place like CalArts. And it's very specialized. So I went in there and we had this figure finishing department and there was like 40 people and they were sewing Winnie the Pooh costumes for Pooh's Honey Hunt for Tokyo Disneyland.
Oh.
And then you had another table in the figure finishing department and they were making mummies for Indiana Jones Adventure for Tokyo DisneySea. And I kid you not, I'm a huge Disney fan and I love watching old specials like Disneyland Showtime and, all those great behind the scenes, things with the Osmonds, right? Like taking you through the, Imagineering, right? How the stuff is made. And I felt like I had been transported into the 1960s, right? Somehow, and was in the middle of one of these great old Walt Disney Presents. And I'm going around and there are guys on the machine shop floor, right? These guys who were building the figures. And I was introduced to a couple of these guys. And, they were, older gentlemen and they all knew Walt, right? It's like, so that was cool, and it's like, I was just, even if I hadn't have like gotten the internship, I was already happy that I got to go hang out there for an afternoon, right? So that was enough for me. And then, they said, oh, you can come in. And then I'd come in 2 days a week. And then, I got to meet Mark and Alice Davis, had lunch with them. It was like basically the animators in the department and Mr. Intern Boy with my giant stack of books. It was like I come in and because I missed seeing Mark at CalArts like a week or so before, which was super sad. And then it was like, When You Wish Upon a Star song like went off and it's like, oh, like a boat out of the blue, fate steps in and sees you through. So I got to meet Mark Davis. Right. And so that was cool. And I just like, I need to get all these books signed. And I had this one book and it was Chanticleer and the Fox. And are you familiar with Chanticleer and the Fox?
I am. Yeah, I know it was something he really wanted to do, and
Right.
just couldn't get it pushed forward.
Yeah, I had a teacher at CalArts, Dan Boulos. He was my animation teacher, and he loved like Mark Davis stuff, and he would like put up slides like from Chanticleer and things like that. And I remember getting that book, and I was like so excited. But there was one sketch, and it was like right towards the front of this book that Disney Publishing had put out, and it's like it's a really cool drawing of Chanticleer, but I didn't understand the pose. I never understood it. I always thought it was a great drawing, but I didn't understand what was going on. I hand Mark the book to sign, and he's like, "Oh, you've got one of these." Mark opens the book. He's like, "Yep." Yeah. He's like, "Hand me the pen, son." I'm like, "Okay." So I hand Mark the pen, and he goes to this fox sketch, and then he adds the cigarette back in. So it was like this, they had photoshopped out the cigarette. I guess they probably used whiteout because it was probably before Photoshop. But he added the ashes, and then he signed it, and I just loved that he did that. And it's like I've got an original Mark Davis sketch in my book. So thank you to the publishing people who took it out.
Yeah.
But it was just like moments like that were like so magical. And got to meet Ward Kimball. John Hench you'd go into John Hench's office at 1401 and he'd tell you stories. John Hench told me this great story. I think I had just finished animating Abraham Lincoln at Disneyland, and I'd already done Tokyo DisneySea. I was one of the lead animators on Sindbad, and I'd already done Superstar Limo. So my treat from my manager for finishing Superstar Limo was to do Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, which I really appreciated. So I got to animate Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and I have great memories of Marty Sklar coming down on the weekend, like coming into the theater, like he's down there with his family. I'm in the attraction working overtime, just trying to get through it. And, here's Marty. He pops in. He's got his little, fishing hat with all the pins all over it. He's wearing shorts, and he's like, "Hey, Ethan." And he's just like totally down to earth, just an amazing guy. I love Marty. So I remember going back to Glendale after finishing up Lincoln and, talking to John, and he's like, "Oh, he did a great job, Ethan." And then he's, we got to talking, and he told me this story about the World's Fair Lincoln. It was this story, and I don't know if it's been told much, but the Abraham Lincoln attraction opened late, right? It was like 2 weeks late opening with the fair. But what John told me was there was guys from, I guess, MAPO, right? WDI's, machine shop, basically, that were stationed out there in New York during the fair to make sure that everything was operating properly. So John tells me this story that these two guys who were supposed to be watching the figure, making sure it was working, they went out for a long lunch, and they didn't do the show check before the 2 p.m. show or whatever, or the 1:30 show. And they came back and they couldn't get it running, right? They tried to do a test. Guests are coming in and they're like, "What do we do? What do we do?" So according to John Hench, this is right from John Hench, these guys, they locked off one of the drapes in front, because when you watch Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, all these drapes reveal, right? It's this big, amazing thing. So they locked off one of the drapes, and then they took another chair and they set it in front of the drape where Lincoln was. They took the costume from Abraham Lincoln, put it on one of the guys, put the beard. So they faked it. And, but the audio, all that stuff was running, right? And so like the show starts, the pre-show, all that, great Sam McKim artwork runs. And then curtain opens up, right? Other one doesn't open up because the figure's back there. And then the light comes down on, maintenance guy dressed up as Abraham Lincoln. And then he's sat there for, 2 months at this point. So he knows the show. So he gets up there and he's, lip syncing, like whatever, Forrest Gordon say, I guess they don't say that. That was the Gettysburg show I did. But, he does the Lincoln speech. And what ends up happening is the audience just erupts in applause because, "Oh my God, it's so lifelike," right? And, and then supposedly, according to John, he went out. This maintenance guy was so excited. Like, you had all these people cheering for him that he went out into the audience and started shaking hands with people.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, when John told me that part, I'm like, really? I mean, I want to believe it. I really do. So I really hope it's true.
I was with you until the guy walked out in the audience.
Right.
Like,
that's what I felt
real?
too. Yeah. That's what I felt too.
Until that point, That's such a great story. So I don't know how to follow that story. That was great. I don't know what to ask next. So DCA, you mentioned Superstar Limo, and it was an interesting time for the company when you were working there. And I mean, great things came out of DCA. Soaring Over California, I love California Screamin'. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff, even from 1.0. But I know that was kind of a challenging time. Curious what it was like to work. If you want to talk about Superstar Limo, that's great. And then also just, your experiences kind of with some of the attractions in those early years there.
Well, that was the thing. It's like I lucked out. I spent probably 6 to 7 months training right at the Tahunga facility, and I was working on A100 figures, which are the humanoid advanced animatronics at the time. And I would just get to animate different pieces of park audio, which was just super fun. And then I went on to Sindbad for Tokyo DisneySea, and that was a lot of fun too. And we had hundreds of figures. We had lots of animators up there, and we had lots of young animators. So some of the young animators, I was one, a great animator, Dave Gottlieb. He actually went on to animate on films like Bolt and Tangled. So he's a fantastic animator. And also my good friend, Sean Jimenez, who was the art director on the most recent version of DuckTales. And he also animated Pooh's Honey Hunt for Tokyo Disneyland. So, we had a good time. We had skateboards. Like, we were in this big, giant warehouse in Santa Clarita, California, like miles away from, it was a good 45-minute drive, like on a good day from, Glendale. So we basically had the run of the building. Like, there was a few people there, but we got to sit there and animate scenes, and you had all the set work for like Sindbad. And when we took breaks, we would, get on our skateboards and run skateboards around this big show building. And it was just so much fun. Bought Nerf guns, had a great time. And we were, of course, we all loved seeing, photos of like Wathel Rogers, who was like one of the original automatronic animators. In fact, like I would say he invented the art form of animating them. He always had a pipe hanging out of his mouth, right? In all these photos. I think if they were to release they don't release those photos anymore because they don't want to, promote smoking. And there's probably a good reason why they do that, because us, young kid, impressionable animators were like, look at Wathel's so cool. He's got that pipe. And of course we like went out to lunch, and then there's like, some cigar store, because in the mid-90s cigar stores were everywhere. We're like, let's go buy some pipes. So, stupid us, we're like, sitting behind the consoles, like with pipes hanging out of our mouths, for photo shoots for ourselves. So I don't think those pictures exist anymore. But yeah, we had a good time. But yeah, DCA was a project. It was going on. Like David Gottlieb and Sean, they were both on Muppet Vision 3D. Muppet Vision's a really fun attraction, and the figures are great. Bean Bunny, the Penguin Orchestra, and I got to work on the Penguin Orchestra. And there's a really funny story about the Penguin Orchestra. So we're in the field, like at California Adventure, and we're trying to get everything finished. And I was the only animator in the facility that day, but on a job site with Imagineering, and if you're doing something really technical, you can't have like a bunch of construction and stuff next to you. And, it's like, I can't have someone jackhammering next to me when I'm working on a figure, because there's hydraulic lifts, there's things, it can be dangerous, right? So you need to be focused, you need to concentrate. So sometimes we'll go on night shift. So there's this horse trading that goes on, for control of the attraction. So this one day we had control of the attraction. I'm sitting in there animating the Penguin Orchestra, and my show programmer, who is relatively new, an older guy, but a big, he worked out, right? This guy he was buff, and you did not want to mess with him, right? And he could be intimidating, super nice guy. But if you didn't know him, you'd be intimidated. So I'm sitting in the attraction, and we were told not to go into the pre-show because the pre-show was complete. So management was so happy. Oh, the pre-show is complete. We're going to have a party in the pre-show of Muppets because it's dust-free. It is the first finished thing at Disney California Adventure. So Paul Pressler, who I believe had just been promoted to the head of Parks and Resorts, was at this party. And, he's the head of Parks and Resorts, and he wants to see what's going on. So I just remember sitting there animating the penguins, and I see the door open up, and in walks Paul Pressler. He wanted to see what was going on. And my show programmer jumped up, charges over at him, and he's like, "Get out, this is our theater," and it kicked Paul Pressler out of it. Had no idea who he was, right? And Paul was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'll let you guys get back to work." But it was the door closed. I'm like, you realize you just kicked the president out of the attraction? So that was hilarious.
That's oh my gosh. I'm trying to picture that, because you've got this guy who runs a tight ship as, the program guy. And he doesn't care, that's crazy to think about. Well, like you said, there's so many competing forces at work between management and with your animation and then everything else. So for DCA, I know one thing that you were involved with closely is Monsters Inc. attraction there, which did replace Superstar Limo, but ended up being what I think is a pretty cool attraction. Then ultimately they went ahead and created I hate to say even better, but just a different type of attraction in Tokyo with Ride and Go Seek. And I know you were involved with that too. So I would love to hear what it was like, because I know you were involved with the Roz living character, which was a really big deal. So the characters I think the strongest thing about Monsters Inc. in California, the characters are really cool looking and really believable. So I'd love to know kind of what that experience was like for you working on that, and then maybe even in Tokyo too.
Well, I think what happened for me was, I'd been pitching a bunch of different ideas, like some different holiday overlays and things like that with my good friend Jim Clark, who I think you had on the show before. Yeah. And, Jim and I would pitch different things, and we'd been pitching a specific holiday show, and we'd been, pitching to Imagineers like Kevin Rafferty, who just retired. But, Kevin's a great guy. And a great teacher, right? So I think what happened was Kevin, Robert Coltrane, I think they saw something in my work, right? And they asked me to help out on the Monsters attraction. And I think part of it might have been I had worked on Superstar Limo. So I animated all the celebrities. And, I was a little bit disappointed. Neil Engel, who was the creative director on that attraction, who also did Jurassic Park for Universal. Well, he is very talented. He got to meet Cindy Crawford, like the actual Cindy Crawford. And I was very jealous of that. Anyhow, but they did like this whole like making of DCA thing. And I think you can find footage of Neil and Cindy Crawford talking about Superstar Limo somewhere out there. All I know is I had worked on animating all these celebrities, and when you build an attraction, it's like they cost a certain amount of they cost something. You pay for it over time. So like the park has to pay for it over time. If you were to, so let's think about this. Superstar Limo was open for 9 months or something like that before it was closed. You're still paying for all those figures. Audio animatronics are expensive. You are not going to take those audio animatronics and recycle them or like toss them. You will recycle them, right? So I think the first thing I was brought on for was how do we use the existing celebrities in this Monsters attraction. So my first job on that attraction was coming up with Cda agents. I knew the functionality of each of the characters. I knew how to draw. I had been around production, for 3-4 years at Imagineering. So I knew what the process was. So I worked with Larry Nicolai and Robert Coltrane, and we developed what the Cda agents would be. So I know which one is Cher, I know which one is Whoopi Goldberg, and I know who voices who. And a really fun thing is each of the CDAs, there are numbers on them. So the numbers that are on the Cda agents at California Adventure, those are important dates to many of the core team members. So the one that was previously Tim Allen is my wedding anniversary. So that was fun. And then, Larry Nicolai and I, would go to the sculpture studio and go through sculpting. And then Larry went off the project, and then I was tasked with art directing the production of all of the animated figures for Monsters. So that was actually the first time Walt Disney Imagineering started working with Garner Holt Productions. So Garner Holt is a outside vendor that is out in San Bernardino. There had been a lot of people laid off from Imagineering after DCA and Tokyo DisneySea had opened. So Garner was smart, and he picked up a lot of talent. And so it was great going out there, because it's like, oh, hey, because it was Old Home Week. It's like, I know you. And it was just like, so it was great seeing, people that you'd worked with closely and new faces too. Garner did a great job building all those figures. And then we built a lot of the figures in-house. And Roz was the most complex, because that was part of the Living Characters Initiative. And the first living character was Turtle Talk with Crush. I think when we first started, we just thought she would, say a few lines, kind of be like E.T. from, Universal, which I love, the E.T. ride. It's one of my favorites. But we learned a bunch of stuff on Turtle Talk. So we worked with Ralph Fernandez, who was one of the great Imagineers who helped develop Turtle Talk. And, we just kept developing. Kevin Rafferty wrote all these great lines. So I'm animating the figures. I'm going down to the site, staging the figures, except the ones that, Pete Docter placed. And that was Pete Docter and, all the guys at, Pixar. It was like an open door, right? It was just like Pete would hang out in my office at Tahunga, and we would just, chit chat about things. One of my favorite things is he almost was an animator of audio animatronics. Like I think he told me he was offered a job at Imagineering to learn how to animate figures when he left CalArts, and he was offered the job at Pixar. And I think he really made a good decision.
He did okay.
He did okay. He did good. But again, he's so nice and just down to earth. And, he does not, he's not like, I'm a Hollywood executive. Right. So it was like, if you go through the attraction, there is a poster. It's a portrait of Waternoose, right? The villain from Monsters Incorporated, the movie. And I just remember Chris Runko and I were riding through the attraction, and we're like, there's something missing here, because you had a look back, which was Smitty and Needleman, and they're like punching the time clock, and it's a fun little scene. But when you're going through it, you naturally want to look at this wall, right? And there's nothing there. So we're like, we need to do something. We need to figure something out. So I was, I remembered watching the movie and like, oh, there's this great portrait of Waternoose, and it's a digital film. There has to be a file of it somewhere, right? So yeah. I contacted Pete and sent Pete an email. Hey, Pete, do you guys have this? And he's like, oh yeah, I'll get someone to send it over. Sent it over. We had someone print it up on really nice, canvas. And then, Chris and I looked at it, and he was like, oh, we'll cut out the eye and we'll put the following eyes behind it, right? Like Haunted Mansion style thing. Cause Chris did special effects for years. Right. So we just did it. Right. It was just fun. And our producer, Jody McLaughlin, she like got a really cool frame because she used to be in props. And it was so like things like that happened on that attraction, which were just so much fun because it was like community theater almost, right? You're just like, oh, hey, we need to put on a show. Oh, hey, this isn't looking right. Let's put this here. And we did. And it was cool. And another fun thing that happened on that attraction is when you're going through the sushi restaurant, there's that background noise of like all the people screaming because, they've just exited the restaurant. But we didn't have any money for like media, like on the back walls and all that stuff. But if you go through there, there's shadows running around. And that was Chris and I going through the attraction, like, God, it'd be great if we could have something there. And then, Chris and I were at the backstage commissary at, California Adventure having, tuna sandwiches or something. And we're just like chit-chatting, just brainstorming at lunch. And we're like, couldn't we just do one of those little like shadow projection things? Like, I think I just seen like what was like Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow movie, and they had like a little shadow projection thing with a candle, and Chris, because of his background in special effects, is like, oh yeah, we can do that, and that's what we did. We just like got an oatmeal box, mocked it up, right, put it in there like the next day. We looked at it and then we figured out how to make it, real and sustainable. But that type of stuff, I mean, that's true Imagineering, right? It's like you can sit in a conference room and you can figure out things and estimate things and, we can do, but the ones that the attractions that don't have all that oversight, right? Where you can just like, here's our budget. This is what we have to work with. And we're not going to go over that. We're just going to go in there and we're going to do it. And we're going to have fun too. Those are the best projects. So that's what Monsters was like for California Adventure. And, I did spend a ton of time animating Roz. I mean, I think Kevin Rafferty wrote like 125 lines. And I was like, thankfully I still did not live far from Tahunga. So I would be there all night and, just animating this figure and just getting all these lines of dialogue in there. And it was fun. And then we opened it and I was so happy. And then we're like, we can plus this. So we actually spent a lot of time, my good friend Juan Alvarez, who's a fantastic show programmer, one of the best show programmers ever. He and I spent like 3 weeks and we added like another 100 lines of dialogue to Roz to make her more interactive. So that was super fun. And, but that's the thing. It's like you worked with, the first time I worked with Chris Runco was on Monsters for DCA. And then about the time I finished Monsters for DCA, I went right on to Monsters for Tokyo. In fact, I think they overlapped for me, honestly. And, so I was the lead animator on the Monsters attraction for Tokyo, and we had Roz, and this time it was going to be in Japanese. So, I'd already animated tons of Japanese dialogue for Sindbad, so I knew what to expect with that. And it was a lot of fun, and I loved working with OLC. So we got all of Monsters done, and then we were off to Tokyo Disneyland working on Ride and Go Seek, and that had the interactive pop-ups like with the flashlight tag. So that was a lot of fun. And we had, if you've been on I know you haven't been on the attraction, but for our listeners, if you've been on the attraction, you've got the flashlight. We had one that was it was connected to a little Pelican case, so a little tiny briefcase, and like I'd get to walk around the attraction with the flashlight and just like test things and make sure it was all working before we do our big ride-throughs with executives and things like that.
That attraction is so interesting to me, just because of the flashlight tag, but also just comparing it. You can compare it to DCA and see kind of how it came after and some of the differences. But it's something really to see. But you mentioned animated figures, and another figure that you worked on that I find so interesting is, well, you worked on more than just the figure, but in Ariel's Undersea Adventure, that's a really interesting attraction just because there's so many figures in it, but especially the Ursula figure, which to me still, I mean, I know that attraction's been around for a while, just is such an interesting animatronic, the way that it moves around and has its own area. So I'd love to know a little bit about that, but also just your work, because I know you were so involved in that attraction and what it became.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because we had just, all the projects seemed to just like blend into each other for me because I finished Monsters for Tokyo Disneyland, and I had like honestly just come back from a business trip, finishing it up, and like that next Monday, I was back in the Mapo building at the main campus at WDI, and I'm looking at the model with Larry Nicolai and Chris Merritt and team, and we're trying to figure out the staging of the figures. Like, what are the figures going to do? At one point, and I think we have a tendency, all designers do, we put everything in. You're just like, oh, we're going to have this, and we're going to have this, we're going to have this, and you have all this stuff in there. And one thing that Mark Davis did so well is he knew how to stage things. He knew how to direct the eye. He knew what was important, right? So, if you think of the auction scene in Pirates, the auctioneer is the most complex animatronic figure. That is what the staging, it's all focused on that. That's just good. He did a good storyboard drawing, right? And then that was translated into a good model. And then all the ancillary characters, which have changed up for, reasons. But even still, right, it all focuses up towards the auctioneer and what he's trying to sell, right? Be it chickens or women, right? I think it's chickens now, which is probably best. So you've got, Mark Davis design, and then some attractions. I think you just have to think about like what's that visual hierarchy, because Mark Davis did that so well. And I was fortunate on Monsters for Tokyo to work with Joe Lancicero, and I would consider Joe Lancicero, I mean, Larry Nicolai, Chris Ronco, all those guys are my mentors, but I would consider Joe Lancicero to be my greatest mentor. And he had a background in animation. He worked at the studio for years, worked on a lot of the films up to Oliver and Company, I believe. I think he started at the studio the same day as John Lasseter. Both went to CalArts together. So Joe knows his stuff animation-wise, and he knows his theme park stuff. And I learned from the best. So he like really, when we were working on Monsters, he like drove it into us. It's like, this is the important thing, Ethan, right? This character here, when, it's like, it's Mike Wazowski. This is who we're looking at. We're not looking at Boo over here. She's secondary. The main focus is this. So we're going to put our functions, we're going to put our funding into Mike Wazowski. So that's how, we worked together. And that was really important. So when we got to the mermaid attraction, it was like, I came in, it's like, okay, why do we have all of these things here? Ariel and Eric are the focus. I mean, if you look at some of the original concept art that was done for the Ursula scene, there was going to be an Ariel figure in there. We just saw Ariel, right? Ariel was like, 2 feet back. And it's like having Ariel in every single scene would have been too much. And I think removing Ariel from that scene and just making it Ursula's moment, we put the money where it mattered into Ursula. And we spent time developing it. And like, I'll never forget, it's like her arms, right? It's those big silicone arms. I'm at Tahunga, and we're checking the figure out. You make sure it's working, right? Test and adjust. And the skin didn't look right. It was like saggy, and it just didn't work. And like, all right, guys, we need to figure this out. We need to we need to work on this. And the plastics guys and the figure finishing team at Tahunga, they came up with these bands, and they came up with all this out of the box stuff, which is what Imagineers do. And they made this skin that's just magical, right? And then, Ursula's like torso, it's like I wanted to get squash and stretch in there, because squash and stretch is so integral to like great character animation. And they used a ton of it in the film on, Ursula's torso. So we wanted to have that in there. So we didn't do a skin there. We've got stretch fabric, right? It's like a velour or something like that. I mean, they figure finishing did it, right? And they just know what they're doing. I mean, the ladies and gentlemen who like do all the figure finishing, it's like they worked on the Yeti, They worked on the Ursula figure. It's like, you name it, they worked on it. They worked on the grizzly bears we did for Hong Kong Disneyland for the grizzly coaster. I mean, it's the same people, right? And it might be different vendor shops sometimes, but it's a small industry. Ursula was super fun.
Oh, that's the scene. I mean, nothing against any of the other scenes which work, but that scene it's quick, and like you said, you're focused because, again, it stands out because it's not overdone with so many other things. And I think that's a great point about a lot of great attractions, the way that sometimes I would never say simple because it's a really complicated animatronic, but just
Right.
the setup of the scene is that way. Well, speaking of complicated animatronics too, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train,
Mhm.
which, is interesting, of course, because, it's a coaster, but the scene in the middle, which is really kind of the standout scene, the animatronics for the dwarves with essentially, and I know, gone on to things like Frozen Ever After and others, but that at the time to me I hadn't seen anything like that at the time. And I know you were closely involved with that attraction and those characters. So I would love to know how, because they're so different than, like you mentioned, pirates or something, but still work in a very different way.
I mean, I think what happens at the beginning of attraction, it's like, someone comes up with the pitch, right? And then it's handed off to another team, and then they develop it. And then there's a price tag put to it. And then they start bringing in, subject matter experts, right? So like I came onto the attraction and they already had the concept. We're going to go through a mine scene. And originally the plan was, we're going to take all the existing dwarf figures from the Snow White ride at Magic Kingdom, and we're going to put them in here. I'm like, oh, well, there's not that many, and they're not holding pickaxes. And to make them hold pickaxes, you're going to really have to change them. And I understand wanting to reuse things. Come on, I'm the guy who turned Cher into a Cda agent, right? So I really, I was like, oh, let's talk about this. So we talked about it, and we figured it out, and we did reuse all of those dwarfs. They're just in the, in the little the cottage at the end, right? So all of those were able to be reused, but we needed purpose-built dwarfs. We needed to tell the dwarf story in the mine. And how do we start? I did storyboard sketches. I did quick sketches. It's the same way that Mark Davis would have worked, right? It's like, this is the storytelling vignette, right? This is what this dwarf is doing. This is what Happy and Bashful are doing. This guy is asleep and he's got a skunk on his head because, that's humorous, not too humorous, but it's a little humorous, right? And we're going to have Doc, and Doc's going to be counting things because he's the serious guy. So we just brainstormed and did quick sketches and came up with stuff. And because I'd animated so many figures at that time, it's like, okay, this one's going to be 8 functions. This one's going to be 10 functions. Okay, that one's going to be too expensive, right? And so we would have like the engineers in there. We would have other people in there. And I remember early on, it's like, they're the dwarfs from the Seven Dwarfs. I mean, talk about amazing character animation. It's like you had Bill Teitla, you had amazing animators who trained the 9 old men work on this film. Art Babbitt. I mean, it's like great guys. And, you want to be reverential to what they did. So it's like in my, my first wish list was, oh, we're going to have 25 functions in the face. Right. Because, we're going to, make it face squash, stretch, and just be amazing. It's like what you saw in Ursula. I wanted to do that more. Right. Because she had a bunch of facial functions. Right. And it's like, well, we can't really do that. And you're going by them quick. And that's the other thing. It's like when I'm thinking animation, I fall in love with it because I love animation. Right. And then I have to remind myself to step back and say, no, I only need this. Right. This is what I really need. But we did need to pay off on the elasticity of the face that you had in those characters. And the best way to do that was with, the projection. Right. And we'd done Buzz Lightyear and things like that. And, they'd been working on some mock-ups for some different attractions. And it was coming together, and they were able to, they were doing the science project of fitting the projector into something small, which is great. But from an artistic standpoint, I didn't feel it was there. And the Tom Flowers, who was our original creative director on the attraction, he didn't think it was there yet. So we kind of just like Went to management. We're like, hey, we think there's an opportunity here. We just need a little bit of development money. So we got a very small budget. And then I got Guy Fenton Burke, who was plastics genius at Imagineering, one of the special effects guys, and Todd Mathias, who was a figure finisher. And the four of us basically did this mock-up. And the key to it was getting blacklight on the character and airbrushing blacklight paint onto the other surfaces, like the hands, the clothing, the beards. Because when you see Buzz Lightyear, he's glowing. His face is glowing, right? When the lighting is right, when the costume is right on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, it's seamless, right? You don't know that there's a break, right? And the big thing with the Dwarfs was their character designs. I don't think the projected faces work with all characters. I think it really worked well with the Dwarfs because we had some nice natural breaking points. And so we had a beard, right? So that beard created a nice soft edge. And then you had the hat that came down, which also created a nice soft edge. And then you had I think the most important thing was the nose. Noses aren't going to animate, right? Unless you're like doing some weird thing, like there's a fly on his nose, but we weren't going to do that. So you had this big fiberglass nose in front of this projected surface, which was glowing the same intensity of the projected head. So it just made it all come together as one cohesive unit. So that was my job, was to develop that look, pitch it to the heads of parks and resorts, and they loved it. And like, yeah, we're going to do this. And we did it. And we did it in Shanghai, and it was just fun. And I got to work closely with Walt Disney Animation Studios. In fact, I was a shared resource with Walt Disney Animation Studios during that time. And it was just so great. And we worked with traditional animators at Walt Disney Animation Studios on the facial animation, CG animators. We had every different type of animation you could imagine going on in those characters. So we had guys doing the animatronic animation, guys doing CG animation, 2D animation. And then we had to be in sync with our lighting designers and our figure finishers. And it was just it was fun. And I didn't actually animate on that project. Like that was I'm going into art direction. That was the moment where it's like, okay, I dabbled in art direction on monsters, right? I've been doing it, right? I've been learning. I art directed a bunch of the stuff for, all the figures for the Finding Nemo attraction at Disneyland. So it was time for me to hang up my console, right? It's like, I'm not animating on the console anymore. We're doing digital now. I'm going to move on to other things.
That's interesting too, because you went through a whole description and I was right with you thinking you animated it all. And but I mean, like you said, there was just everything you described had to do a lot with the art direction of it. And that scene in general, I feel like I just want to stop the coaster at some point and figure out, because like you said, I didn't think about the fact that Doc's nose was different than the rest of his face and all of that, because you see it so quickly. But that's also kind of its genius, because you don't see that much of it. You come out of it going like, wow, that's interesting. It doesn't really reveal it all. It's perfect for how fast you're moving, I guess.
Right. It's the old showbiz thing, leave you wanting more, right? Because you want to spend more time with those dwarfs. It's like, I love that you slow down there and you get to spend some time. If you could do an entire attraction like that, it's like, if it had been like twice as long, it would have been, that'd be really nice. Maybe one day.
Yeah, because you start to go up the hill and you're just like, oh, wait, we're already at the end of the scene. It's too short. But I don't mean that as a criticism, because really, like you said, it's very rewritable. Well, speaking of something completely different, before we finish, I have to ask you about, I was lucky enough to visit Alani a few years ago. And I mentioned that because something that is very big there among a lot of the people that visit are Duffy. And I learned a lot on that trip about Duffy's friends, like Shelley May and Gelatoni and Stella Lou and so many others. And I know you were involved, not with the original Duffy, but with the friends, and very closely worked on those. And I have to ask you about it, because I'm not going to have another chance with someone who was involved with Duffy's friends. So please, in all seriousness, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, it's funny. Part of the reason that I, wasn't animating on Mine Train is I was on so much, right? I was art directing that stuff. I was helping out on developing a bunch of stuff for Shanghai, a lot of the Fantasyland stuff like Peter Pan. I was helping design a lot of those vignettes. And then we had, this little thing called Mystic Manor that was the last attraction I animated on. And I designed all the characters on Mystic. And again, I was working with Joe Lancicero, so loved it. Mystic Manor was my favorite attraction that I ever worked on in my career. And the week that I flew back from finishing Mystic, Daniel Ju, my friend who took over the Tokyo portfolio from Joe Lancicero when Joe was so focused on the cruise line and the Hong Kong Disneyland development. Daniel asked me if I would come in and join him for some brainstorms for the Duffy franchise. And I knew who Duffy was. I had little kids. Like I had a kindergartner and, a toddler. I mean, he was like, my youngest was like 2 at the time, I think. Yeah, he was pretty young. Duffy, we knew Duffy and we loved taking photos with Duffy at Disney's California Adventure. And so he was the thing. I'm like, of course, I'll go to a brainstorm, right? I was a little jet lagged, because just got back from Hong Kong. And, I go to this meeting and, we've got some of the one of the original writers of the guy who Scott Hennessy, who came up with the story of Duffy. He was there. He also wrote Kitchen Cabaret and so many wonderful things at Imagineering over the years. I love Scott. And so he's in the room. Another writer, Charlie Watanabe, who's another great friend. And we're all in this room, and Tom Childs, another writer in there, and a very talented artist, Leia May, who is one of our Imagineers in Shanghai. We're all in this room, and we just start brainstorming stuff and just coming up with what could this new character be. And we're doing research on different animals and all this stuff. And I think the first sketch I did of Gelatoni, I suggested a pirate cat. So he had like a tattoo on his chest and very un-Duffy. Like, to be honest, it's like, I didn't really understand the whole Duffy thing at that point. I knew Duffy from California Adventure. But there was also some great designers from Oriental Land Company that we would chat with in some other meetings. And we basically, we came up in those meetings. I mean, Gelatoni came from those meetings. Stella Lou came from the meeting. Olu started there, right? We had a sea turtle, and we also had a dog. His name was Pancakes, and that's how. And it was so funny the way the dog, who was a chef, came about was I asked my 4-year-old who wanted to be a chef at the time, right? He's in kindergarten, or maybe I don't know. He was like 4. He was super young, and I said, like, if Duffy's gonna have a friend. Like, this is before I'm tucking him in. Like, I just read him stories. And I'm like, what kind of friend would Duffy have? It's like, oh, he'd have a dog. He'd have a dog friend. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And like, well, what does a friend do? I'm like, well, he's a chef. I'm like, oh, that's good. Chef dog. Like, what's the dog's name? Pancakes, because my son loved when I made pancakes, right? So it was Pancakes the dog. So, he goes to sleep. I take out my sketchbook and I draw Pancakes the dog. And then in the meeting the next morning, like, Pancakes the dog, right? And it stuck there for a while, but we passed on it. But it came back and became Cookie Ann, which is a chef dog who makes waffles, not pancakes, but similar. But it's so funny because it's like there's so many stories with Duffy and friends. It's like the hang tag story, which Charlie and I developed, right? It has this like meeting of Duffy and Cookie. They like run into each other, and they have like that Reese's, peanut butter moment. If you remember, like the ad from the 80s is like, you got your chocolate bar and my peanut butter, right? I mean, and that was my inspiration for it, was that commercial, because I grew up in the 80s and I loved that commercial. And, so that's kind of how that came about. But it's like the cotton candy waffle sandwich. It's like at one point it was chicken nuggets and a waffle. And at another point, it was a hot dog and a waffle. And it was a hot dog and a waffle for a while. And I'd drawn it in the hang tag and I wasn't feeling it. I'm just like, that looks weird. we need to get rid of the hot dog. So we got rid of the hot dog, and like we had a whole meeting, and I drew different things on the hang tag, right? For what is the food? And then I came up with the cotton candy waffle sandwich, and, we bought some cotton candy at the store, and I made waffles, and I'm like, here, kids, we're going to have a cotton candy waffle sandwich. So, and it was delicious. So if you haven't tried it, I suggest the cotton candy waffle sandwich, because it's more sugar, right?
Yeah.
Sugar goes good with everything goes good with sugar, right?
It's a great tip. I'm gonna do that soon, I think.
But yeah, so Gelatoni, is an artist, and he was based on my son, who was taking art classes. All the Duffy friends are about 4 years old. And, I loved working on Duffy and Friends. Duffy was designed by Cody Reynolds as the Disney Bear, and Joanne Cicero and Scott Hennessy came up with the story of Duffy. A very talented designer, Mark Page, who I believe he just started at Netflix animation. He was at Imagineering. He designed Shelley May. And so then I designed Gelatoni, Stella Lou, Cookie Ann, and then I oversaw the design of Olu.
Wow, that's impressive. Sometimes, like, when I read the stories of Duffy and like his friends and the way they met, and I'm always just like, huh. And the idea of the brainstorming and coming up with those doesn't really surprise me. I think it sounds like a fun project that, especially in Tokyo, I know is still so popular.
Oh yeah, it's like, the last project I worked on for Walt Disney Imagineering that opened. I mean, a lot of it is still going on now. In fact, today I was very excited. They announced the Cinderella for the atrium for the Disney Wish. So I developed that concept for the atrium statue and art directed the maquette sculpting, and also the stern for the character. And the stern character is really fun because I helped design the stern character for the Disney Dream. Chris Runko worked on that as well. And also Mark Page did the one for the fantasy, which was Dumbo. And the other two were done by John Hench. So very little group of people who've actually had the opportunity to do that. So I feel like I'm in very good company with Chris Runko and Mark Page, and of course, John Hench.
Oh yeah, that's a really great group of people. Do you mind if we go back for a minute to Mystic Manor? Could I ask you to talk a little more about that? Because I did talk to Joe and Cicero about it, and he described it basically as like his crowning moment of his career as a designer. And I don't disagree. What interests me, and I know a lot of fans, one is, an original concept. It has a few connections to Haunted Mansion, but very different. And then, of course, the SEA and the trackless ride technology. And there's just so much to it. And I would just love to know a little more about your experience on it, with designing or working on some of the characters like Albert and Lord Henry Mystic.
Yeah, it's so funny because it's like the way that a lot of these projects come about. It's like Robert Coltrane started Mystic Manor, and I'd worked with Robert on Monsters, and he worked on Monsters for Tokyo, and then I was on Toy Story Mania. I art directed the development of the Mr. Potato Head figure, and then I was the lead animator on the project, and we worked really closely with Pixar Animation Studios. But we had a lot of animation footage to produce on that, and we had like as many animators as we had on Sindbad for Tokyo DisneySea working on Mr. Potato Head. So it was that complex. And I had been animating Potato Head, I want to say, for 6 months solid.
Wow.
And it was a lot of work. And, we had a lot of footage to do. And I think everyone at Imagineering knew Ethan's busy. And I think my boss at the time kept like pushing people away. Leave Ethan alone. He needs to finish Potato Head. What happened was like we had some we were showing off Potato Head, right? We'd hit a deadline, and we were at a certain point, and we wanted to show a bunch of the team members. So we had a little wine and cheese thing, I think, and everybody came over from 1401. And then I think Robert came up to me and he's like, Ethan, I've been trying to get you. I want you on Mystic Manor and Grizzly Gulch and like all this expansion stuff for Hong Kong Disneyland. And I was like, well, that sounds really cool. And I really wanted to do something other than Potato Head because it was fun at the beginning. But after 6 months, you're like, can I do something else? So I finished up Potato Head, but instead of working, 60 hours a week on Potato Head, I went down to 45, and, the other 5 hours I can work on something fun, something new. So that's kind of what happened. And that's how I got involved with Mystic and Grizzly Gulch. I was super excited about Grizzly Gulch because, bears, and I love my country bear jamboree. And it's like, ooh, I get an opportunity to design some bears for Disney. So ultimately, I mean, it's me. So I always go cartoony first. And, Robert and team was like, Ethan, pull it back. These are real bears. And we ended up with I think on Grizzly Gulch, we ended up with a very nice hybrid. They're stylized, but they still look, realistic. But there's still a sense of caricature to them. So worked out all the gags for that show. So the bear that's rubbing his back on the track switch. In fact, my wife worked on that attraction too. She did there's media eyes of the bears, when you first go into the first tunnel. So she did all that stuff. That was cool to work on a project with my wife. So that was great. And then, Mystic Manor, it was super realistic originally. And we were developing the figures, and, on every attraction, we do what's called scrubbing, right? It's you scrub your estimate. It's this is going to cost too much money. And you want to fulfill the creative guy's dream, but you change things. And the best way to do it, and which is what we did on Mystic, is we changed things. But when we changed things, if we de-scoped something, we made sure that it made story sense. So I think the best example of that is on the finale completely changed. We re-storyboarded that entire thing. Originally you were going to go into the finale room, and that whole room was going to be going crazy. The suit of armor was going to be more animated than it was in the first, when you were in the cataloging room the first time, and everything was going to be nuts, which meant lots of functions, which meant lots of man hours, which meant we're going to spend so much money animating every single thing in here, right? It's going to be a can of worms, right? And when we did the math and we did this is what this is going to have to be, it was just too much. And we had cut some stuff in the Chinese salon, which is the room before it. And then this designer, Keith Gallo, he was our interior designer. He and I were tasked by Mark Shermer, who was our overall creative director and overall the producer of the attraction. And I'd worked with Mark on Monsters for Tokyo, and he's fantastic. And, he asked Keith and I to just come up with some options for the finale, because when he came onto it, he felt like it wasn't working because we de-scoped so much from what the original intent was. And Keith and I are sitting in my office, and I just remember saying, Keith, just need to rip the roof off of this place. That's what needs to happen. And he's like, yeah. And then we're just the two of us started feeding off each other. And that's how, the best ideas happen, right? When you're partnering with someone. And we didn't end up ripping the roof off, but we ended up ripping that sidewall off. And that is the most unexpected moment in that attraction. And the story conceit was this music dust has gone so far, the way that Robert laid it out. It's the music dust was, you start in the music room, and it was bringing these things to life that were, nice. A harp's going to come to life. Who cares? It's not going to kill you, right? A suit of armor, like a samurai armor, it's going to chop your head off, right? And then it got progressive. Each room, tribal arts rooms, it's you've got guys throwing spears, right? It got worse and worse and worse for Albert. But then you got to the Chinese salon, and you're just okay, there's a Monkey King, but there wasn't you didn't have it just didn't have that, oh my God, Albert's going to die, we're going to die, right? At that moment in the story where everything goes wrong and there's no way of getting out of it, right? Ripping that wall off. And, we had Jerry Reese. He was our media, director. I did some, little storyboards, and Jerry did this beautiful animatic, and then, worked with the studio that produced all that media. And it just, that scene, every time I go through it and I write it, it's just even though I know it's coming, because, I said, hey, let's rip the roof off the place, right? it gets you, right? You're just like, wow, that's so cool. And the first time I rode through it with guests, right? We had like, it was a cast preview. So we had these cast members and like these guys were like bored, right? They're like, I'm in line and they're like on their cell phones playing, Bedazzled or whatever, like, a little jewel drop game. And I'm like, okay, they're not looking at anything in the queue, right? All the awesome props, all this stuff, they could care less. I'm sitting behind them. I don't remember, one of the team members was sitting next to me in the back row. And these three guys are in there and they're like watching it. And then as things started happening, like when the cannon fires off, they're jumping. And then when we were in that Chinese salon and that wall ripped away, they're like, whoa, my God, they screamed. And I'm like, yes, I did it. Right. So, I think the best part of that is of the story that we set up there. And Joe and I have talked about it a million times. A theme park attraction that you can do your book report, like the Monsters Incorporated attraction for a California Adventure. That's basically a book report of the film, right? Mystic Manor, we didn't have a film to base it on. So it's like when you know the property like Monsters, you've seen the film, these, you've been with these characters for 2 hours of your life. Something like Mystic Manor, you don't know who these characters are. So the designs have to read. You have to know, oh, this is Albert. He's cute. I like him. I want him to succeed. Lord Mystic, he's a bumbling idiot. He doesn't have a clue that his monkey is getting into all this trouble in his house under his nose. And the place is like ripped apart, right? He's clueless, right? So all that stuff had to be in the design and had to be caricatured so you could read it quickly. So when I think of that attraction, it's really a retelling of The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah.
And I think the main difference is at the end of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Yensid comes in and saves the day, right? The sorcerer. In Mystic Manor, Albert he closes the box. He does the hard work, right? He realizes what he did was wrong and he puts it right. So, it's very similar, right, to Sorcerer's Apprentice, but we told a new story with it, right? There's only so many stories you can tell.
That's really interesting. And just too, is to having that at a park that in Hong Kong, where, just like you said, I can see a YouTube video on my phone and see those characters and I can know right away what it is. And it's only going to be stronger in person. I think I'm just glad that that was able to be made, given, like you said, how trends with a lot of attractions coming off of movies and off of things that we know so well. It's still really cool came together.
Yeah, I think it's really great. I think they're still doing that stuff. I was one of the last attractions I worked with before I left Imagineering was the Jungle Cruise reimagining. So I worked with Kevin Lively on that. It was super fun, like going through the Jungle Cruise in Florida, looking at things, doing sketches. We even got to go on safari at Animal Kingdom, went around with one of the wardens. Wow. So Kevin and I and one of our coordinators, we were like in this, truck, and we're like going around the savannah at Animal Kingdom, and, we're stopping and doing sketches of different animals, and, so much fun. And that's the stuff that I'm going to miss the most at Imagineering is, getting to meet like the different cast members and stuff like at Animal Kingdom and things like that.
So you mentioned the Jungle Cruise. I know you worked on it very recently. I'm just curious, just if there's anything more you can reveal, not like a secret, but just about that experience for you.
I'd worked on Jungle Cruise before. Like, Chris Rumko had come up with the idea for the, I think we redid it in 2005 at Disneyland. So I animated that, I reanimated the show. I came up with the piranha gag for originally for Hong Kong Disneyland. So Tom Morris and one of my favorite Imagineers, Skip Lang, who no one really talks about Skip, but Skip was like the rockwork guy, the rockwork guru. He built Mount Prometheus at Tokyo DisneySea. He did Big Thunder Mountain, and he's another one of my favorite mentors. And I really, he's passed, but I love Skip. And he had so many great stories, like, working with all the, the original Imagineers. But so we came up with that piranha gag for Hong Kong Disneyland originally, and then it made its way to Anaheim. So, good ideas never go away. And, I hope that I haven't been on the I don't know. I don't know what's been going on at Imagineering for a year. Right. So the fact, just what was it last week, they released the image of the monkeys at the end, which is great because that was, concepts that, Chris Merritt and I, were sketching, we were in the room, like doing gag sessions and, monkeys, we were both doing sketches, and Chris and I are the biggest Mark Davis fans. So of course, we're being reverential to Mark and wanting to make sure that you got the humor in there, but we're updating it for audiences today. And that's something I will say, even Mark Davis, it's like, I think you go online and I will see the stuff and you'll see like these fans and they're like complaining about, oh, you're changing this and you're changing that. And it's like, Walt Disney changed the Jungle Cruise.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And Mark Davis changed the Jungle Cruise. And, I think I mentioned early on that I had when I first started, I had lunch with Mark Davis. And Mark Davis, was going through a bunch of slides at this lunch for Western River attraction. And I remember Mark stopping on one drawing. And it was a beautiful drawing. And it was a funny drawing, but it was insensitive. And he called it out, right? 80-something-year-old man. It's like, you know what? At the time I drew this, I thought it was funny, but I felt that it was very insensitive to Native Americans. And being part Native American, I appreciated that, right? So, it's like, I think when fans get upset about this, like, no, artists like Mark Davis and Walt Disney, they would be changing the stuff too. And, who knows? It's like maybe something I designed in Mystic Manor is going to offend someone in the future. And another designer, another artist is going to get a crack at it and they're going to change it. Go for it. I'm all for it. Right. It's like, it is not a piece of art that's in the Smithsonian. Right. That piece of art that Mark did is there and it's history. But what is in the park should be changed to reflect what guests of today are.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a great point, especially just given I'm excited to see the updates to the Jungle Cruise, and everything I've seen so far looks just really cool and fun and well done. And also, like you said, just reflecting changing times. Well, I have one last question for you, Ethan.
Sure.
More of a general question, but you worked at Imagineering for more than 20 years, worked on so many cool things. And the industry, of course, has changed plenty in the last year, but especially even just the whole time you've been there. I'd love to know, there's a lot of aspiring designers, Imagineers, animators, people that want to work in the field. What type of advice would you give someone who, whether they're studying or starting in their career, and I know that it's different, this year feels different, but just in general, based on your experience, I'd love to hear some thoughts.
I think the important thing is, figure out what you're passionate about, right? If you want to be a writer, go to the best writing school. Marty Sklar was a writer. Michael Sprout was a writer. Scott Hennessy was a writer. Those guys were fantastic writers. And they were Imagineers for a very long time and they had great careers. So Marty always said there's over 140 disciplines at Imagineering, and it's very true. So, if you're a video editing guy, right? If that's what your passion is, then become the best video editing guy. And then if you see a posting for, Imagineering and it says, we're looking for a video editor, apply. And if it's a temporary thing or a project hire or something like that, go for it, because who knows what's going to lead to. Because my 6-week internship, which was going to just be, for me to say, I worked at Imagineering, for 6 weeks, that's, and I was going to go work on, The Simpsons or something, right? I got to make a career out of it and I love it. And it was so much fun. So, I think follow your passion, be persistent, right? Not annoying, but persistent. And the one thing I'm learning this year, as I am like many Imagineers, we are looking for work. you have to learn how to write these resumes that like go through these bots that, look for keywords and all this stuff. And that just like blows my mind, because it's like, I would talk to when I got my jobs, like I talked to the person and they looked at my artwork. I didn't have to go through this step. And so that's very foreign to me. Hopefully things like that will change, and, personal at artistic organizations. It's like, if you ever heard like Chris Runco, I don't know if he told the story about how he got his start at Imagineering. He told me he like walked in with a stack of drawings, right? That's amazing. I think that's something that is missing, that personal touch from a lot of these businesses. So hopefully Imagineering, I don't know what Imagineering is doing, but hopefully they're not doing that. I know they've got the great outreach program with Imaginations and all that stuff. And I think the big thing is that if you do land that job at Imagineering, you have to keep learning, and you have to keep your mind open, and you want to learn something new. Like Mystic Manor, we used ZBrush to sculpt all the characters, right, for Albert the monkey. And that came out of my frustration with Shandu the tiger from Tokyo DisneySea. That tiger, I had drawn all these sketches, all these different poses. And then I think we had like 8 or 9 different versions of Shandu in the attraction. But we only had budget for 3 sculpts. So we took this head and we took this arm and we kind of Frankensteined him together, and the figure finishing covered it, and it's close. But if you were to look at my sketches, it's like, oh, there was so much more vitality in it. And it's like, his head was cocked up, and, that wrist was in a position just so. And on Mystic Manor, on Albert, we were able to do one sculpt digitally in ZBrush, and then we were able to pose it and mill it. So we started using new technology to get a better product. So we had sculptors who had never done digital sculpting before, and they learned the tool. And I had one friend who he was just cutting mats. He was like in our special services department, and I knew he was a sculptor, right? He was a very talented sculptor. And he and I were, chatting one day. I'm like, you should learn ZBrush. And he's still there at Imagineering sculpting in ZBrush, which makes me very happy. So I think that's the thing. If you have the opportunity, get in, do your best, impress people, and keep learning things. I mean, I had this great opportunity recently to do the Unreal Fellowship with Epic Games. So Unreal Engine is what's used in like TV shows like Mandalorian, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's become the thing. Like, they are filming everything in front of these LED, screens, and it is just this amazing technology. And I was given this opportunity to take this class, and it was a fantastic class. And we had like all these students from all around the world, and it was like all on Zoom. And 8:00 in the morning, you'd show up and you'd like go to your lecture, and then you'd work on your film. It was like being back in college, and I loved it. And I produced a little film. Didn't quite finish all of what I wanted to finish, but I got far and I learned enough about it. So, and I know I want to do more in it. But I think that's the thing. Even everyone says, even if you're not an Imagineering, if you've been an Imagineer, you're always an Imagineer. So, and depending on the day, you might be a curmudgeoneer. But today I'm an Imagineer.
That's great advice. And I think it shows too, not just with Imagineering, but just in so many different creative fields, how the learning part, I think, is such a key point. Because, I mean, it's like you mentioned with that technology, it just keeps evolving so fast. And so I'm glad you had that opportunity with the Unreal Engine, because what I've seen of The Mandalorian, like the behind the scenes where they show the big dome, and it's not people like Phantom Menace standing in front of a green screen, not knowing what they're looking at. It's mind-blowing. And I think technology like that is going to be used in so many different ways in the future.
Oh, absolutely. And just what they're doing on Mandalorian is cool, but just me sitting through these classes, like learning, doing motion capture for the first time, really. And the funny thing is, animating on the animation console is a form of motion capture. And technically, motion capture started at Walt Disney Imagineering with audiometronics in the 1960s. If those images of Waithel Rogers, in that getup where he's like controlling father from Carousel of Progress. That's the birth of motion capture. That was the first time it was done. And we got away from it at Imagineering. And, it's like, and I've seen like recordings of Wathel Rogers. Like it was like a fireside chat. And it was like before he retired, he like recorded all this great stuff. And I hope someone still has that stuff. And it was like, we didn't want to do the harness thing because it didn't do what your body couldn't do, what the character couldn't do what your body did. And it was uncomfortable. And it would take them 3 hours to get in and out of the harness. Well, it's not like that anymore. I can use my iPhone with Unreal Engine and capture a facial performance, and it looks fantastic. And I don't even have to clean it up. So it's like, I look at that and it's like, well, I can program an entire show by myself, and I can, lay out the entire attraction in Unreal Engine. I can do all this stuff in this piece of software, right? Which would have taken a huge team before, but I can iterate quickly and I can change things. And my architects are starting to use this stuff. And it's like, to me, I feel like I kind of struck gold, like learning this Unreal Engine thing. And I'm going to keep diving into it and, see if I can help revolutionize like the themed entertainment industry with it.
That sounds amazing. I'm excited to see where it goes. And Ethan, this has been so great. Thanks so much for talking with me and on the podcast. It's been a blast. So that was awesome. Some of the stories Ethan told, I think the John Hench 1964 World's Fair Lincoln story might be my favorite that I've ever heard on the podcast, of just kind of a fun anecdote. I think it's up there with the How Bowers ninja story, if you remember that one, as just being kind of a, did that really happen kind of moment. But I loved hearing that, and I hope you've been enjoying the shows. If you like this one, I mentioned it earlier, my shows with Jim Clark and Daniel Joseph in terms of digging into more recent attractions and updates are both great. You can find those and a lot more. Go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcasts with an S at the end. So this is a listener-supported show. I've given this spiel a lot, and I just wanted to say that I remember when I started doing something through Patreon a few years ago, and I kind of thought, why am I even doing this? I mean, this show is a fun thing for me. This isn't something where I'm going to make it big, or I'm not trying to be, no offense to anyone who does this as a full-time job, but it's just not what I'm going for here. So I started it kind of thinking, I don't know if anyone's going to support this. And there's been a really solid group of contributors that all of you guys are amazing. Thanks so much for that. And it's been fun for me because it drives me to do better with this show and also with the perks that extra shows I do for them. So if you're someone who really loves what I'm doing here and just wants to help out, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/member. You can learn about how to become a member, which basically means you make a very small contribution. You get access to extra podcasts. I'm going to start beefing those up and try to do more. I'm only 3 patrons away from another bonus show. Those are like 2-hour extravaganzas. I'm going to focus on the side of Epcot, basically, with Journey to Imagination, the Land Pavilion, and the Living Seas, going through their entire history. And those are just really fun. I did one on Spaceship Earth as a bonus show that was a blast to do. So if you like that kind of stuff, you might want to check it out. Or if you'd rather just say, hey, Dan, I'd like to buy you a Dole Whip. Dole Whips are getting pricey. But if you'd like to do that, basically just give a little bit to say thanks. You can go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip to find out how to do that. All right, that's the end of my PSA for now. I just want to say thanks again for all the support. If you'd like to get in touch with me, shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. You can always follow me on Twitter @TomorrowSOC. Go to Facebook or Instagram @TomorrowSociety. You can also find the Tomorrow Society Podcast YouTube channel, where I've been posting home movies, slideshows with commentary, all kinds of fun clips. If you like the material on the show, it really connects to that. So you can check that out, tomorrowsociety.com/YouTube. Tomorrow Society Podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with the creative director of themed entertainment at Marvel Entertainment, Brian Crosby. This is another great one. Really enjoyed it. Brian had input on some Marvel attractions like the Iron Man Experience, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. Also just really interesting insight on someone who worked for Walt Disney Imagineering, then moved over to Marvel. Very cool. Can't wait for you to hear it. I hope you're all doing great. Go out there, get vaccinated, have a great time at the parks, and I'll talk to you again very soon.